Muita coisa acontece ao nosso redor, inclusive situações de assédio. Mas você não precisa de superpoderes para ajudar as vítimas. Você precisa saber como reagir em segurança. Olhe para os lados e ajude a combater o assédio nas ruas e no transporte público hoje mesmo. Não dê passagem para o assédio. Clique no banner e faça o treinamento gratuito Stand-Up, de L'Oréal Paris.
Welcome to 4.0 to Pro, the Pickleball podcast that focuses on a single shot, tip, or strategy to improve your pickleball game with every single pocket-sized episode. Our goal is to make you better on the court every time you hear our voices.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of 4.0 to Pro, your pocket-sized pickleball podcast, where we teach you a single shot or strategy every single episode. I'm Michael O'Neill here in sunny Long Beach, California. I'm joined by my good pal Mircea Morariu in Chicago, Illinois at the A Tour stop. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you today?
I'm well. You had a singles day yesterday, made it to the semis.
Yeah.
Got beaten by the guy I got beaten by in New York, which was Marcelo Jardim. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, we had a nice battle, had a lot of really good points, and he's an excellent player. So he ended up winning the whole thing. So
the man can move.
Yep. He's probably the best mover out there in our age group in singles right now. So
yeah, that's what I felt as well. I said, man, this is man's a problem. Two quick pieces of housekeeping, everybody. Number one, as you may have noticed, we haven't heard from Scott in quite a few shows. Scott has decided to move on from the show, and we wish him well. We had a great time for the episodes that we had together, and Mircea is here in his stead. So let's welcome him and all of his experience and knowledge to the show. Thank you for being here, sir. I very much appreciate it.
I'm honored and grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
And as always, if you are looking for a new pickleball paddle, and who isn't, everybody, carbonpickleball.com, CRBN pickleball.com. You get 10% off by using the promo code 402P at checkout. Mircea, we have ourselves a number of questions by our fervent and loyal listeners, and I thought I would throw you right into the fire and reel a few questions off, and we'll see if we can get some of these things answered. What do you think?
All right, that sounds great.
Clay says, hey, I love the show. Just started listening like 3 weeks ago, and I've already listened to all the episodes. Thank you for the binge. I was just wondering if you had any advice on finding pickleball while out of town. I'm a pilot for Delta Airlines, and I'm constantly trying to find games or tournaments open play while I'm out of town and typically do not have much luck. If y'all have any advice, please let me know. Mircea, what I love to do is if I know I'm going to Orlando or New York or something, I will always join their local Facebook group first, because there's always a busy, especially in metropolitan areas, there's always a Facebook group that has typically hundreds or thousands of people on it. And if you just say, hey, I'm coming to town Thursday through blank, I'm a 4-point something, and I'm looking for some competitive games, can you guys recommend some places I can go check out? People are usually really, really open with, you want to go here at 8 a.m. until 11, and then, on Thursdays, we do blankety blank on this thing. And I've had a lot of success with that. That's been my number one move.
Yeah, that's a great call right there. People are generally really welcoming, which is obviously what we love about the pickleball community, is just how open it is and welcoming. So that's a great suggestion. One of my favorite things to do is look up a local club if I can, if there is such a thing, as opposed to public park, and basically just call the club and try to connect with a pro or who's ever at the front desk. And they are typically also very, very welcoming and very helpful in terms of setting up games, or at least directing you to people that may be able to set up games.
Yeah, and I think you can do that also. You can do some Instagram stalking, because most of those clubs have their own Instagram accounts. So you can usually do a little bit of intel. I know when you're a pilot, you've got a lot of downtime in hotel rooms and things like that. So I would, create a spreadsheet and just have all of those cities that you travel to regularly. And then once you get there, one of the things I like to do, Mircea, is I'll take I have an iPhone, so I'll use Apple Notes, but there are, Android equivalents. And if I'm in a new city, kind of whatever it is, like I get off the plane and I'll just make a note that says, Orlando or something. And then I'll break that note down into like pickleball, restaurants, people I've met, blah, blah, blah. So the next time I go there, I have this little database of, oh, this is what I do in Orlando. And that's typically very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And often what I've done is ask friends of mine that I know have been to the area or from the area, and they can usually hook you up as well. So that's another way you can do it. Just a little scouting beforehand.
So this one, to me, is a little bit different because I think it can open up the door to a more complex conversation. Matthew says, I've had recent success at sneaking, quote unquote, to the kitchen line. I've been approaching the line slowly on my serve return and then dashing towards the line as soon as my opponent puts their head down to drive the ball back towards me. I've consistently caught them off guard by, quote unquote, not being where I'm supposed to be. Is this a sound strategy or only effective at my level of play? He goes on to say, I haven't been trying to cultivate this move. I'm just slow to the line. Where I was going with this, Mircea, is that we talked in the past a little bit about instead of just the blind charge to the non-volley zone in the kitchen, the person who's returning the serve, if they go a little bit slower, and let's say that the servers have been hitting high thirds, well, it may give the person who's already at the net, let's say if they're playing left side, it might give them a nice amount of room to poach a ball without having their partner directly in their way. Like if somebody has a really strong volley or forehand and is able to really get into it, especially if they are on their third going to middle, well, maybe then that person who's coming in doesn't charge so quickly and can leave a little bit of space and give them something to think about. Otherwise, I'm team get up there as quickly as possible. But strategically, maybe there is something there.
Well, it's definitely an interesting tactic. And the person asking the question has obviously been successful at it. So if it's working for them, we say, by all means, keep doing it. Typically at the higher levels, it's not going to be quite as successful, but there's two aspects of this. One is you brought up the person that is already up at the kitchen. So you have your partner returning, you're already up at the kitchen, and your job is to try to put as much pressure as you can with proper court positioning and proper technique to try to take the fourth if you can, especially on drops that you can reach. So you're protecting your partner, number one, by allowing them to get up. And number two, you're putting pressure on the other team. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. In terms of kind of varying how slowly or quickly you get up, if you're trying to surprise someone and it works, great. That being said, they typically, especially at the higher levels, start to realize that you're doing that coming up, or as they're unwinding the stack and they get caught and they hit the ball or hit it into the net. And the extra couple feet they're gaining in real estate, I always say, is not worth the loss of stability and balance. So stop right before they're hitting the ball or as they're hitting the ball in the context of coming up from the return. Make sure you're stable and balanced. It also allows you to see if the ball is going out. So if you're not stable and balanced, people often hit out balls when people drive and they're up at their shoulders. And that's a very, very common mistake. So those are some of my key thoughts regarding this question.
Especially if they're running by you, like a running by the ball. So that makes tons of sense. Stable base, split step. Obviously, we have a guy that we play with locally that, for whatever reason, he really doesn't prioritize getting to the non-volley zone. He's a decent player, but on return of serve, he really meanders to the non-volley zone line. So when we're playing against him, every third is a hybrid drop. It's sort of that drive, drop, new school third we've talked about on this show, where we're just aiming at his feet. And, ultimately, it really does end up being some sort of pop-up. If you were stable and you were just hankering to hit defensive balls from the middle of the transition zone, then okay. But I can see strategically deploying it when there are some high thirds and you've got an aggressive teammate that wants to step in and really poach that shot. I think it's pretty sound. I'm not sure if I would do it every single time, but it could be a thing.
One additional thing, my guess is that this works better with a relatively lofty return. And that's something that's often overlooked. People derive their returns to try to get it deep. Well, one good way of trying to get up, especially if you're somewhat limited in terms of your mobility, is basically to kind of loft a return. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be a lob. It can be kind of an in-between shot where it's not a drive, it's not a lob, it's sort of in between.
So Jonathan says, I'm a 4.2 duper, whatever that means. I have a question about where our eyes should be focused, especially at the non-volley zone. I'm actually really excited to hear your thoughts on this, Mircea. At the baseline, I feel like I have enough time to view and see where everyone is, then decide where I want to hit my next shot, then redirect my focus on the ball to make solid contact. At the non-volley zone, it's a different story for me, mainly with speed-ups. I usually track the ball, but I often get caught off guard because I'm not doing a good enough job observing paddle angles and body positions that could give away their next shot. I'm not making great contact when I focus on the paddle and body position. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. By the way, while working through your podcast, there was one about communication. This is an area that I excel in. Even when it's obvious it's my ball or my partner's ball, I'm saying something. When my partner's at the non-volley zone, I'm just behind working my way up. I let him or her know I'm here. In addition to the benefits you mentioned regarding communication, when I talk, it keeps me more engaged and energized. Thank you, Jonathan. First thing, Mircea, one thing I will say is we've talked about the instigator drill on this show a lot, which is where you're dinking straight across from someone. One person is responsible for speeding the ball up, and the other person just has to reset it. And it really forces that person who's resetting to stay ready at all times. And I will say, and I'm hoping you can attest to this or expand on it, Mircea, as you work your way up this duper ladder, from 3.5 to 4.0 to eventually 5.0 and above, you can start expecting speed ups from anywhere at any time. And you really have to be ready for them. So as you're in the middle of the point, I do agree that sometimes it feels weird when you've got a couple people dinking diagonally away from you, but man, you never know when that ball is going to come ripping right at your hip. So it really pays to stay attention and track the ball. And then I'll say one more thing, Mircea, before I let you roll on this, because I feel like you're going to have a lot to say, that I've heard about full tracking and half tracking. Half tracking being that you're following the play in kind of your peripheral vision, but keeping a frame in front of you that is your sweet spot, if you will. And if the ball comes in from that peripheral vision, it's going to eventually come right into your window and you're going to go, versus following the ball left and right like you're watching a tennis game from the net line where your head is just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So I think initially, before it has evolved into what it's evolved into now, that the latter was probably a little more popular where you're following literally every little thing the ball's doing. And now I'm wondering, and this is what I'm hoping you can attest to, do the higher level players keep it a little more in their peripheral vision and focus more on that counter than maybe you did when you were a 4-0 type player?
That was quite a description. I like it. Good job with that. First of all, this is probably a good topic for probably one or two shows.
It's probably a show. Yeah, this is a show.
But I'm gonna try to dissect this into a couple different pieces. So the first piece we talked about is being ready and trying to anticipate speed ups. And really at every level, I always say the same thing, which is, and it's really quite simple. Always expect a speed up. Always. On every ball that is remotely controllable for the opponent. And what I mean by that is you can adjust to a slower ball, to a dink, or perhaps a lob much more easily than you can adjust to a speed up if you are expecting a dink. Meaning, if you expect a dink and they speed up, you're having a much more difficult time adjusting to it. But if you expect a speed up and you're ready for it and they dink to you, you're ready. So always expect a speed up. That's a really simple thing. And I think people can really relate to that really at any level. And often, ironically, at the lower levels is when you have speed ups that don't make sense. That are,
That's true.
That So anyway, that's one thing to keep in mind. So that is simple. In terms of the full tracking versus half tracking that you mentioned, it sort of depends on the context and again, how comfortable you are. The more comfortable you are, the more you can half track. So the more you advance in the game, the more you can see the patterns and the better your communication you have with your partner, the more you can try keeping your eye a little bit off the ball, if you will, meaning just kind of looking straight ahead and keeping your partner in your peripheral vision and being able to anticipate balls that are speed ups or counters much better. Definitely at the higher levels, there's more half tracking going on than full tracking. And again, the half tracking is basically keeping your partner in your peripheral vision. And part of the reason that it's important is because if your partner is pulled out, you want to make sure that you're following them in a dink rally. You don't want to just be looking straight ahead and have your partner be off the court and you not covering the middle. So you really need to keep in mind where your partner is relative to you and relative to the spacing of the court, because you need to know where you're going to be covering. What's also really helpful with this is having targets, communicating with your partner generally where they're hitting the ball. And if they get a soft, fluffy ball, if you know where they're going to speed it up, let's just say ideally you're playing the left and your partner's playing the right, and they say, if I get a fluffy dink to my forehand, I'm going to speed it up right in front of me to the person straight ahead. That way, if you and I are playing and I see that you have a nice meaty dink and you're about to whack a forehand, I know you're going straight ahead. So I don't have to watch you hit the entire ball. I can just turn my head quickly, knowing you're going to hit the ball in front of you and try to cover the middle.
Yeah, that's incredible team synergy too, to have that in your bank account, if you will, to know that. One thing I will say that I do much more now than I did before is I'm begging for them to hit the ball to me. Like, especially if it's cross court. I played a guy the other day that just kept cross court speeding up to me. And so when I was on the left-hand side, I literally shifted my grip to that lollipop forehand, a Georgia Johnson that does sometimes. And I just kept teeing off on it. And I just kept whacking it right at this guy's partner. And eventually I said, if you keep cross court speeding up, he's going to take you off his Christmas list. and then after that, he didn't do it quite as much. But yeah, it was funny.
Well, that's a good example of adjusting. And so that person's partner would ideally do a lot more half tracking. And basically, once their partner has a tendency or pattern of going cross court with the speed ups, as soon as they see that they're going to speed up, just look straight ahead. Because otherwise, that's the other reason for the cross court speed up not working as well in general, is because the person that's not speeding up is looking at their partner, and the person that speeds up goes cross court. So you have to turn your head all the way over. And by the time you've done that, the opponent has basically countered down your line, or the ball's coming right at you, or it's going past you.
Well, thank you. That's a really, like we talked about that. I think an episode on eyes would be a really good one, Mircea.
Absolutely.
Where should you be looking and where are you looking? Mark says, great podcast. I really need help with a backhand slam. I have some shoulder injuries from other sports. I'm 50 years old and I enjoy the game playing at about a 4.5 plus level. I feel I don't have the power on the backhand side. I often play left side with my partner because of my strong forehand. I want to be clear about this. I'm not 100% clear, Mark and Mircea. I don't know how you interpret this, but I'm assuming someone's hit him a relatively high ball to when he's on the left-hand side, his left shoulder. And I don't know if it's an overhead or just maybe a head-high type shot. I don't know anybody that necessarily has a great backhand slam in that scenario. I really don't. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this.
Well, in terms of that shot, ideally, you would want to run around and hit a regular overhead or a so-called
you'd want to slide
forehand
left.
Overhead.
You'd want to slide left and hit an overhead or do a scorpion, right?
Absolutely, if you can. If the player is on the right, obviously you want the left side player to take the ball in the middle, where the player on the right ideally shouldn't be hitting any backhand overheads. So again, we're kind of assuming this is a backhand overhead rather than a regular overhead.
And you're on the left-hand side. You're on the left and someone's gone over your left shoulder. So you've got the line on your left. You know it's going to be in. I think that's, to me, that's sort of a hope for the best type shot.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you have some sort of injury and some sort of physical limitation that's harming that, if you can try to get some physical therapy or do some strengthening, assuming it's medically appropriate, that would be ideal in terms of shoulder strengthening, flexibility, and it'll also minimize your chance for injuries over the long term. So if you have a physical ailment, that's something you really need to take care of, number one. And number two, it's something that you just have to practice. I mean, if you have a weakness at something, what's the best thing to do is practice it over and over again and drill it. I mean, that's really the two things that I would suggest.
I think our default on this, and you and I agree, is if it's at all possible, you slide left and hit it either directly over your head, maybe a slight scorpion, which means that you've got your paddle kind of rotated above your head a little bit, or hit a regular overhead if you can. Maybe take a diagonal step back and allow you to give yourself a little room to do that. But if it's just a loop over your shoulder, I mean, I don't know. I feel like you've just got to FTD florist that thing and get it down somehow. Yeah. Mark, thank you for the question. Michael says, hey guys, listener from the beginning. Singles question. I'm 5'8" on a good day with shoes that aren't worn. Me too. I'm 75 and 3.5 something, close to a 4.0 on some days. It's hard to find anyone my age in Vail who wants to play the Vail area that wants to play singles. So I play with younger players. One guy is 6'4" with arms about a mile wide. No matter what I serve or I hit, he's at the non-volley zone with only 2 steps. So my third shot, remember, I'm a 3.5, which is not that helpful because A, new school third won't work, and B, unless it's perfect, his arms are so long, he'll take it out of the air. So I'm forced to try really low percentage shots, sharp angles and sideline drives. Sometimes they work. Is there a good strategy to work on against really tall players? Thank you for a great podcast. Mircea, I don't know if we talked much, but I did the Senior Pro Tour here in Southern California. I want to say you were there, but I can't remember. But I got beat in the first round of Senior Pro singles. And then my consolation round, I played against a guy that was like 6'7" or something. He was the tallest guy I'd ever seen on a court. And I can completely relate to this dude. I had so little opportunity to even drive a difficult shot down the line. And then my drops had to be perfect. So, I mean, this is, to me, it's just one of the massive, clear advantages of having that much length in singles. But you, on the other hand, have stepped on the top step a number of times in singles, and I have not. So I'm curious if you have ever encountered a really tall dude and what strategy you used against such a person.
Well, I haven't played him in singles, but Stefan Andren comes to mind, who's probably the tallest senior pro that I've been fortunate to play with as well as against. But if I was playing a really tall player in singles, I would basically try to minimize the drops and the angles that I was trying to get unless it was on a ball that I had a lot of control with. So ideally, I would say drive and basically drive at them. So people that are really tall basically have typically long wingspans. So they have wide wingspans. So when you sometimes drive at them, they have difficulty getting adequate paddle control on the ball. Whereas if you try to drop, say, a third, they have a much easier time because they can reach it. And one thing you can do to minimize that is basically drive at them or down the middle and then try to set up the point after that. That's one of the strategies that I use both in singles and in doubles. So that's really the main thing that comes to mind. Beyond that, it's tough to change the natural laws where someone is taller, faster. And the comment about some days I'm a 4.0, we can all relate to that because some days we're all 4.0s or more or less. So I think that was kind of funny, but it's hard to turn the clock back 20, 30 years. And it's also hard to grow 10 inches in height and reach. So you just try to do your best. You try to maximize what your best shots are and try to realize that if whatever you're doing isn't working, so try something else. And sometimes it's just the other player is better. Sometimes you just concede. It is what it is.
Yeah. I was thinking sometimes I go from a 5.5 to a 3.5, depending on the day. Or sometimes the game, or sometimes the point. I have ranged, I'm sure, hence the need for the Same Guy t-shirt, which you can get at makeemhit.com, everybody. Yeah, I agree, man. Really interesting idea, though, to hit it directly at body. That does make a ton of sense because, I mean, I don't know what else you would do other than and make them think about it. At least then you have a chance, hopefully, with that volley that you get back to get a little closer to the non-volley zone. And I mean, maybe it opens up other doors. Maybe there's lobs involved. Maybe there's some misdirects, things like that. But yeah, dude, sometimes it's tough to play a really tall guy when you're not a really tall guy in singles. And that is the bane of my existence sometimes. So here we are. Folks, you've now just listened to another episode of 4.0 to Pro. Thank you, as always, for all your questions, which you can send over at picklehelp.com. You can also send them on Instagram at 4.0 to Pro. And Mircea, good luck tomorrow. You are in senior pros. Is it mixed doubles tomorrow or men's doubles?
Yeah, it's mixed doubles with Anna Shirley tomorrow, and then men's doubles with Dan Gernot on Sunday. So I'm looking forward to it. Got some great partners that are also great people and great friends. So, what could be better?
Well, I hope you get to stand on one of the steps of the podium, hopefully the highest one. And for everybody else out there who's doing like Labor Day tournaments and such like that, good luck out there. You guys keep on rocking. Enjoy your pickleball games. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to 4.0 to Pro. For more tips, find us on Instagram at 4.0 to Pro. If you have a pickleball question, submit it at picklehelp.com. Now, get out there and dominate. But don't forget to have fun.